We are back now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to bring you guys the first preview of Week 3 in one of the biggest matchups that I think we have in this week. We just finished talking about the Cowboys and their defense. How do they respond when the Ravens come into Dallas in a few days now, less than a week obviously, and take on the Dallas Cowboys in a second consecutive home game for the Dallas Cowboys as well. Kickoff is at 4:25 p.m. The Ravens come into this matchup 0-2, and the Dallas Cowboys enter it now at 1-1. Obviously, off of the back of that loss to the New Orleans Saints, and also winning the first game against the Cleveland Browns. Both of them that I just mentioned now, the Cowboys coming off a pretty bad loss, and also the Ravens not coming off of the best performance either, at least towards the end of the game against the Raiders. They gave up another big lead that, we were hoping to see become rectified with the addition of Derrick Henry, but obviously they're not there yet in regards to him and how they want to use him. More on that in a little bit. But, both of them coming off of pretty bad losses. They still have a bad taste in their mouth, and I think there's a good opportunity to kind of set the record straight for both of these teams, right? The Ravens, if they get a win on the road at Dallas, traveling across the country to the Cowboys Stadium, right? Beating one of the NFC contenders. And likewise for the Cowboys, beating the team that made it to the AFC Championship game in the Ravens. Still very good, still have an MVP as their quarterback. A lot riding on this, I think, in my opinion. But before we get to the what ifs of what could happen if when one of these teams loses, obviously. We'll talk about the Cowboys here first. Looking at the Cowboys in this situation, no real new injuries to kind of report on, but the one that has been carrying over from week 1 is that injury to their tight end, Jake Ferguson. According to Stephen Jones, Jake Ferguson was very close to playing last week. He almost made the attempt to play against the Saints, but they decided to not go with that decision to try and preserve him a little bit more. And he should be good to go for this week. If he was really close last week and he goes through another week of practice, maybe with more participation this week, I'm expecting to see Jake Ferguson out there. It'll be a lot of help for this Cowboys offense that really, again, overly relies on CeeDee Lamb. So that's one thing. That's really the only injury news for the Dallas Cowboys. They're obviously, Ferguson coming back should help their offense tremendously, especially when you got guys like Roquan Smith, Kyle Hamilton. You're going to need someone to create a bit of a threat for them when they're out there on the field. And again, a big emphasis on the Cowboys this week is how they respond on defense. How does that defense respond to allowing 44 points against the New Orleans Saints, and also their offense trying to get off to a quicker start, because I think they were just bomb rushed against the New Orleans Saints. The Saints scoring touchdown after touchdown after touchdown. The Cowboys offense was really just kind of taken aback by it, right? It just surprised by it, off put a lot of times in that game where, of course, I think it's unrealistic to expect them to respond with 5 or 6 straight touchdowns like the Saints did. But even still, I felt like they were a bit sluggish, just a bit like a step behind a lot of the time. So by the time the Saints, we get into the second quarter and the Saints are up like 21-6 or something like that. I forget how it went. From that point on, if your offense isn't clicking, you almost have no chance to catch up to the Saints. So that's where we saw some of the biggest issues with this Cowboys team last week and how they try to rectify that. Now looking at the Ravens and any injuries, there's no real injuries to kind of report on them. They're still looking for their first win, however, right? They are 0-2 now after another fourth quarter debacle against the Las Vegas Raiders. They have not figured out yet how to use the bell cow of a running back that they have in Derrick Henry. The dynamic between running it with him, when to use Justice Hill, when to run it with Lamar Jackson, and how to incorporate the pass catchers all into that equation, I think is still lacking. And I do understand it is a bit rushed to kind of expect them to know how to use every single player at this point in the season and how early it is. But I think we would have liked to have seen more of an understanding that, Derrick already on your team is probably the second best player already. So to not use him, even if you are still trying to figure out how to incorporate him in the totality of the offense, you just still need to have him out there and use him to run the ball, to affect defense, kind of manipulate them, and keep them on their toes, right? Because once he's not on the field, most teams, like the Raiders did, pretty much predict that you're not going to run the ball, and then that way you become predictable. Even if you have Lamar and his running ability, you're limiting yourself as to what sort of things you can do, right? Because when you have Derek out there and you can still do all these different things like running with Lamar, pass it, or even hand it off to Derek, the defense has more to worry about, obviously, right, than when Justice Hill is out there. Maybe they don't worry about the run anymore and only have to focus on Lamar and the passing game as opposed to three different things, right? So that's something I want to see more of the Ravens and how they try to incorporate that into their game rather than just being so predictable of what they do when Justice Hill is out there and compared also to when Derrick Henry's out there. And they are trying to figure everything out right now. Their defense is also looking a bit shaky. I was already critical of their secondary a bit. I know Nate Wiggins didn't play in the contest against the Raiders, and that's something outside of Marlon Humphrey that I am worried about a little bit with them. But he should be back. I don't have a timetable on him, but I'm expecting him back relatively soon. But also the pass rush, always looking good. Ajabo's looking good as well, the pass rusher from Michigan. Justin Madubuike is still there, but I feel like they are still just missing an extra level of this defense, right? Last year with Clowney and Patrick Queen, obviously, Geno Stone, and the amount of turnovers he registered. All those guys I feel like are missing, maybe not to such a grave extent, but you do sort of notice their missing presence at some points with this defense. They don't seem as dominant, able to shut the door completely in these two games that I have seen out of them. And, the emphasis on just finishing the game for them, right? They don't want to start 0-3. The last time they did start 0-3 was in 2015, where they finished 5-11. And finishing these games off, especially against better teams like the Cowboys, right, is going to be huge. Not to discredit the Raiders, but that's a game they had to finish. Being up 10 points in the final 10 minutes or so, there is a lot of time left, but when you have a guy like Derrick Henry, you should be finishing off teams when you're in that situation. That's what good teams do. And now, looking at some of the questions that I do have with this game overall, what I'll be looking for is, will the Ravens take advantage of the poor performance we've seen from this Dallas Cowboy defense over the past 2 weeks, and are they able to finally show that full potential or something close to that in this game? And something else also, will the Dallas Cowboys defense rebound, and will they continue to create problems, or will they start creating problems for the Baltimore Ravens? Are they going to continue to have problems with what to use Derrick Henry for, when to use him, being effective with him, still being all in the ebbs and flows of the offense? Those are two things that I'll be looking for in this game to see who responds and answers the call on Sunday. But that leads me into some of the key matchups and factors that I will also be looking at to ultimately decide this game, right? Because I think it's going to come down to a few different points here that will affect which team looks more effective, who looks more reliant or just reliable upon the fact that if they hit all these keys and they look better just from last week to this week, I think it'll be a big point in deciding this game. One of the key matchups I will be looking at, obviously alluding to the fact before, is the Dallas Cowboys defensive line against Derrick Henry and that Baltimore offensive line. Not just in the running game, obviously that's the biggest point, but pass rushers, how effective Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence, and all these guys are in not only rushing Lamar Jackson, but keeping him in the pocket and making sure that Lamar doesn't rush for over 100 yards in this game, right? That's something they have to address on top of keeping track of Derrick Henry. Also, another key matchup is Jake Ferguson and going up against Roquan Smith and that Baltimore secondary. I don't have another receiver that can kind of create problems for the Baltimore Ravens secondary. So how much of a factor Jake Ferguson will be and how effective he'll be going up against, Roquan Smith in coverage or Kyle Hamilton. And can he make an impact right away, right? Can he have 5 catches for 50-something yards or something like that at least to create some sort of threat outside of CeeDee Lamb? And the last matchup I'm looking at also now is Mike Zimmer, the defensive coordinator for the Cowboys, going up against Todd Monken, the offensive coordinator for the Ravens. These two guys, a lot of criticism you could say going to them. Todd Monken maybe not using all of his weapons appropriately, and Mike Zimmer trying to rebound after that performance from last week. How do they study each other? How do they address each other's weaknesses and try to create an advantage off of that, right? How much does Todd Monken run the ball, knowing that the Cowboys struggled last week? Are we going to see a lot of outside zones? Are we going to see some more of that incorporated, more of Lamar? I have a comment here, Rico Diaz. Hey, my friend, I am coming from Chicago. That's where I live. That's where I live at. No, don't even think of it. If you do, I'm not a Bears fan. I'm not yet, because I live in Chicago and doesn't mean I'm a Bears fan. I'm not. Are you a Baltimore Ravens fan or a Cowboys fan? I am not. I'm a Steelers fan. Funny enough, talking about the Ravens, I am a Steelers fan. I'd be lying to say if I wasn't a little bit happy with the problems I'm seeing from the Ravens, but it comes with being a fan, right? The certain level of dislike and respect you have for the Ravens. You look like Hispanic. Are you Hispanic? I'm Hispanic too, from Chicago. I am also Hispanic. My parents are from Peru, but I was born here. So yeah, I am Steelers fan. On top of that, big fan of them for a while now. So getting back into the football now, talking about them, and Mike Zimmer going up against Todd Monken is going to be a huge matchup overall. And some of the factors here to just round it off that I'll be looking for more development throughout the game. Which quarterback will help their team out more to a victory, right? Because I think ultimately in these games, it comes down to the quarterbacks, right? Lamar, how good of a performance he puts in, as well as Dak Prescott as well. The offense doesn't look good, and a lot of that has to fall on Dak's shoulders. Missing some throws. It just wasn't all the fact that they don't have the weapons. Sometimes Dak did miss a couple of those throws in that Saints game. So fixing all that up, which quarterback will be the difference, and also who steps up outside of CeeDee Lamb. Looking at Jake Ferguson, like I mentioned before, maybe Zeke, or just somebody to kind of take the pressure off of CeeDee Lamb. And lastly, can Baltimore hold on to a lead, or can the Dallas Cowboys overcome a deficit potentially? Can they maybe go down 10 points or something like that? And with that being the case, is that going to be the end of the game, or are the Ravens still going to have problems with holding on to leads, right? That could be something that I am looking forward to in these games. But now getting to my predictions, who I think will win. I think the Ravens finally get their first win, because I trust their offense more than I trust the Dallas Cowboys offense, just for the simple fact that there's more X factors, more players on the Ravens offense that I think can go out and make a play outside of Derek, right? They're not just focusing on Derek. They're focusing on Lamar. They're focusing in on also Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman to an extent, Isaiah Likely, Mark Andrews as well. They have a bunch of different guys that can create some sort of offense by themselves. Whereas the Cowboys, I think you're still struggling with finding some sort of spark from the running game. Jalen Tolbert and some of these other guys, are they reliable enough to become bigger targets for Dak? I feel like I'm not there yet. So I'm liking the Ravens offense more from that standpoint. And also, I like Roquan Smith also on the Baltimore defense to shut down any sort of run game that the Dallas Cowboys can try to get going. And if that's the case, they become one-dimensional again, and I think it just makes it easier for this Ravens defense. I think just overall, the Dallas defense, I think, lacks the physicality that is going to be needed to stop Derrick Henry. And if I am not surprised with what I see on Sunday, I think it's going to be more of the same. If anything, it'll help the Ravens kind of get back on track here. If they take it to the Cowboys, and, if the Cowboys lose this game, go to 1-2, it'll be like the sky is falling, I think, the next day on Monday, because 1-2, not playing well relatively in all these games, is going to be a problem, obviously, and there's going to have to be some sort of consequences to me when we get to Monday, though. We're not there yet, but those are my predictions. I feel like the Ravens go to Dallas, and win this game by a score of, I'll say, they'll win 23-17, They'll win 23-14 in this game, I'll say. Not that high scoring, but the Ravens get the win regardless of the fact. But with that now behind us, moving on to some more topics I wanted to get into. Another game I wanted to cover was the Eagles and the New Orleans Saints. Another big game, I think, for two teams that are contenders now at this point. The Eagles carrying on from this offseason, but the Saints surprising everybody this year so far. And could they be potential contenders? I think this will be a great matchup to answer that question and how serious both of these teams can be this year. We're going to preview it just like we did in this segment with the Ravens and the Cowboys, so stick around. We'll be right back in just a few seconds.